For investors, it's really important that capital markets are available. So think about kind of your personal big financial decisions. So it's basically two things, so the most important decisions that people make in their lives. The first one would be to buy something big like a house or apartment. So when do you typically do that? So probably after you've kind of, maybe you met a partner, married, or just want to settle. So usually people do that in their 30s, early 40s, right? So at a pretty young age, where you don't have earned a lot of money yet, right? So hopefully you will have a good job later and earn some money, but probably that won't be enough if you haven't inherited something to buy an apartment. So the biggest, by volume, financial decision that you are going to make is whether to take a mortgage, for example, or not, right? So consumption timing means that you can basically, you have income in the future and you can move that to today, right? So you can, and then you have the money today to be able to afford buying a house. And then you pay basically the mortgage over the next 15, 20 years or so. The alternative is that when you look at where is your income, like where is it highest during your lifetime, to tell you where it's the lowest, it's either when you're very young, so that time is already behind you, or when you're very old, so retirement. Right? And the German pension system isn't totally bad compared to other countries, but it's probably not enough if you want to maintain your standard of living that you have when you have a working income. So another decision that you have is, how do I move money into the future, right? How do I regularly save money and kind of put something aside, not only for your own retirement time, but maybe if you want to inherit something, pass something on to your children or family members and so on. Right? That's what I mean with consumption timing here. So it's about moving your consumption through time. So the retirement savings will be you move consumption into the future, right? You need money into the future, or the mortgage will be moving consumption to today. So you take future income, you get a big lump sum payment instead for today, and then you can buy a house. Third big part that comes into play, I've mentioned the word risk already, probably too often already, but the capital markets here serve a very important purpose of basically distributing risk of firms that you have here to investors, and there are some things that you should prudently do that you don't end up with a huge chunk of risk of, say, one corporation, so you should spread out your investments. It's called the diversification effect, right? So that's the most simple tool of risk management that investors have. And you can use the derivatives that we're going to study to consciously kind of either expose yourself to a risk or get rid of a risk. So just a simple example, if you're, say, a farmer producing or just planting something, and maybe it takes a year or so until you can harvest, but you need to make the decision of how much seeds to buy and how much you plant. You may have to make the decision now, but you're going to sell your harvest at next year's prices. So the problem is you don't know what the price is next year, so you're exposed to a risk. Now you can enter an agricultural derivative to actually fix the price already today. Right? You can basically sell the harvest in advance. The advantage is you get rid of the price risk, and you can do planning without having the risk of knowing kind of maybe the price will be bad, and then you have planted a lot of stuff that you can't sell or only sell at a loss. And there are products available to kind of shift that risk around. And the thing that I find interesting in capital markets, that I've just given you an example for someone who wants to reduce risk, the risk is not gone, right? It's just in the hands now of someone else. So for every transaction that you need to make, you need to find a counterparty who's willing to take the risk. And speculators are not really popular in the media and politics, but they play an important role. It's the flip side of the same coin. If the farmer wants to sell off the price risk, they need to find someone else to take the price risk. And that's usually speculators. Right? So there are some people who are very critical of these derivatives. To give one example, there's Warren Buffett, one of the most famous investors, or one of the richest people on the planet, having a very good track record for about 30 odd years or so. And he called derivatives weapons of mass destruction, because they were responsible for many financial crises when they were used to speculate. Right? But on the other hand, these products also can be useful for risk reduction for some people. So it really depends on how you use a product. And yeah, I think when we study the products, it becomes clear that the biggest point that's playing a role here is that some products have a price of zero, right? Zero cost to enter the product. Then you can make losses or profits in the future, right? So it's something that we would all like to have, right? You enter a financial product, you don't have to pay anything for it. You can bet on the stock market, right? For a cost of zero. But that's why they're so popular with speculators. Next important thing is, and it's specifically true for stock companies, is that the capital market allows you to separate the ownership of the company, that's the shareholder, from the people who's running the company. So for single entrepreneurs in Germany, that's not feasible, right? Einzelunternehmen or Einzelkaufmann. So there's if you run a business as a single individual, like maybe a little shop or an electrician or something running your own business, there is basically no separation between you as a private individual and your private wealth and your business. And most importantly, if you maybe take a loan and your business fails, people can take away your private wealth. This is called liability, right? So you're liable with your private wealth. If you're a corporation, that's different because you have limited liability. That means you put in some money, and that's the maximum amount of money that you can lose, but your private wealth is safe. In terms of numbers, actually the big number of companies in Germany or businesses are single entrepreneur businesses. It's like 2.5 million or so. And the corporations are actually pretty small in numbers, so we only have 8,000 stock companies, right? Which is a tiny number in terms of percentage of the overall number of firms. It's less than 1%. However, these are the big companies that kind of do most of the business, right? So the corporations have a market share, like in terms of revenues, of more than 50%. And the single entrepreneurs are very, very small. So we have to keep this in mind when we study companies here. We often refer to stock companies because we have lots of data available for them, right? You can look up stock prices and you can work with data, which we don't have for the smaller companies, right? But just be aware that this is just a tiny fraction of the companies that we actually have here in Germany. But we're going to use them as examples just for the data availability. And the big benefit is that now you can have a manager running the company, and that doesn't have to be the owner. And a consequence from that is that you need to have corporate governance in play. So, for example, if you have here our investors, you need to have, and suppose there are many small investors, how do they control what the company is doing, right? So that creates the need to have organized corporate governance mechanisms, and part of that is, for example, accounting, right? So you have an annual report with lots of reports in it, so the management has to disclose a lot of information. There's also the annual meeting and the supervisory board. And these structures only are necessary if you have a separation of ownership and control, right? You don't need a supervisory board if you're running your own business, right? So these are the kind of important roles that the capital market provides. Let's have a look at the sizes. So these are from 2020. Maybe the equity market since then decreased a little bit, so it's not going too well in the current year. But if you look at the size here, you see that the equity market is actually the smallest in terms of size, which I find remarkable because if the media is covering financial markets, they're focusing mainly on the stock market, right? So you read about the German stock market, it makes DAX a lot, right? But that's only 40 companies, right? It's a very tiny fraction of the market. However, the fixed income market, mostly your government bonds, are a much bigger market. And as I mentioned, the interest rate products are very important for corporations. That's something that we rarely hear about in the news. Right? And then finally, if you compare that to the derivatives, right, the derivatives market is kind of more than 5 times as large as any of the other two markets. Maybe as a note of caution, so I'm talking about notional. So notional is, in German we say Nennwert, right? So it's a reference value. But the actual kind of cash flow coming from the derivative can be totally different, right? So if you have a notional for a bond, for example, the interest rate that you earn or the coupon is the interest rate multiplied with the notional. So the actual actual payment that you have could be a tiny fraction of the notional. So it's very unclear because we have so many different types of derivatives of what the actual value of the derivatives is and the cash flows associated to it. The notional is a number that we can just report easily. And for everything else, we need to kind of do more computations. As an example, if you enter a futures contract, I mentioned already before, the contract has a value of 0 when you enter it. Right? There's a buyer and a seller, and they only agree to basically buying and selling if the value is 0 for both parties. Right? So no one gets an advantage when you enter the product. Right? So the actual value would be 0 here, but it has a notional. Right? So that would be kind of the volume that you agree on.